We need to collect the questions. And let me explain again, my name's Robert Bryan. I'm the lead attorney for Mumia Abu-Jamal. I'm from San Francisco, and as you know, Mumia is on death row in Pennsylvania. Do we need some translation for what I am saying? Because Miriam can I can go slow and she can translate. Should we just continue in English, or would you like a translation? All right, well, Miriam, can you come up and just do a compressed translation? We're collecting questions. I'm not going to be able to I'm not going to read the questions. What I'm going to do is look at the questions and summarize. We only have a few minutes. A lot of effort went into arranging this call. If the guards allow him to do it, bear in mind that Mumia is sitting in a very small cell on death row. And he's at the mercy of the guards. And this is a legal call to me. I didn't arrange for him to call to speak to a public event. And it's computerized at exactly 15 minutes. If he does call, it will be terminated. So, and I already know some things he and I would like to discuss. We've talked about it. He would like for me to ask. But maybe some of your questions, we may be able to work them in. So I need questions before he calls. Now, let me first thank a few people who were here. Back in April, there was a special program here in Berlin sponsored by PEN, P-E-N. PEN is the International Organization of Writers. It's very difficult for someone to be elected into it. It's the oldest human rights organization in the world. There are 144 chapters in countries all over the world, including the United States. My wife, Nicole, who is sitting here, was after me for 2 years to apply Mumia to membership in PEN. The reason is that Mumia, sitting on a small cell in death row, has written 5 books. 5. He has no access to a computer. He does not have access, he cannot Google to get information as we all do and take for granted. And it's astounding that he could write 1 book, much less 5. He also writes commentaries each week that are heard on radio stations around the world, and they are also published in various newspapers. He is a highly recognized and acclaimed writer and journalist. He was a very well-known journalist at the time of his arrest in 1981. And Barbara was from Amnesty International, was talking about Mumia being a symbol. And he's become a symbol in part because, as she mentioned, he can express himself in a very eloquent way. And he's become what people refer to as the voice of the voiceless. Can everybody understand me? Are we okay? Okay. Sabine, wherever you are back there, I know your English, you're learning it, so I hope you can understand what I'm saying. But Nicole was after me to file an application for Mumia to be a member of PEN. And I finally got around to it last year. PEN, and incidentally, working behind the scenes, people who worked with me was Salman Rushdie, one of my heroes in the field of literature, one of the great living writers of the world, certainly. Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, E.L. Doctorow, who wrote the book many years ago, the novel based on the Rosenberg case, and a number of other very prominent people. And it was interesting, after I filed the application, summer a year ago, I received a call one day from Penn in New York. And incidentally, the Penn has had presidents such as Norman Mailer. I mean, we're talking about the lions, the legends of literature. And a member of Penn called me from New York, and he asked me, he said, well, you want to apply Mumia for a special membership being on death row? I said, no. I want him to be treated equally with Alice Walker, Norman Mailer, people like that. Either he's accepted as for his writing craft, or we withdraw our request. And a few weeks later, I received a letter from Penn that he had been elected. He's the only person on death row in the world who's been elected to Penn, only person in prison in the world who's been elected to Penn, not in any special category, but simply for his craft of writing. And I remember the day that I told Mumia, his voice broke, and I could tell he was crying. And he said, Robert, you know how much this means to me, that I'm accepted not because I'm a political prisoner or because I'm a voice for people who cannot speak well for themselves on death rows, but I have been accepted simply for what I do and what I like, and that's to write and to be a journalist, which is very touching. There's a member of Penn here tonight, Sabine Kabir. Sabine, where are you? Yep. Oh, no, you're wrong, Sabine. You haven't learned your English well enough yet. Wrong, Sabine. Sabine, where are you? Oh, here you are. Sabine, would you just stand? Sabine organized a special program that Penn had at the Bresch House back in April. And some of the most prominent writers in Germany read from Mumia's books, and I spoke, and it was a full house that night, and it was very touching, and it was very much about what Mumia is about. His commentaries, as you may know, are about other people, and he writes and speaks about issues that I think are very special to us here tonight, such as not only the death penalty, but women's rights, education, poverty, the horror of war, the horror of governmental leaders like Bush, who have done such atrocious things in the name of God and country. And he does very good things for and touches a lot of people around the world from that little small cell. If he's allowed to call in shortly, just bear in mind when we're at this wonderful university that he's in a cell that's smaller than most of your bathrooms. A very small cell. And it's a very miserable place where he is. And yet, his spirit never breaks, and when we get discouraged, me as lead attorney, other people who work with me on the case, all I have to do is listen and talk to Mumia for a few minutes, and my spirits are uplifted. I'll paraphrase an old saying that you can lock up a person's body, but you cannot lock up a person's mind. And his mind, his spirit, as evidenced by his books, by his commentaries, he is as free as a bird in the forest. And he's a very special person to me. He first started asking me to represent him in 1985. That's 23 years ago. Eventually I turned him down, but he came back to me 6 years ago because his case was a mess. And I finally agreed to take over the mess of the case, and we're now in the U.S. Supreme Court. Let me tell you just a little bit about where we are with his case. We, as I said, are in the United States Supreme Court. Just a few weeks ago, the district attorney finally, we were wondering, we had won in the lower federal court on the issue of the death penalty. In March, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit ruled that the death penalty had been unconstitutionally applied in Mumia's case. And the court, in effect, ordered a new jury trial on the question of whether he should be executed or not. That was a great victory. It's not what I want. I want his freedom. But it was a big step. Since then, the district attorney has been silent as to whether or not that office would seek to overturn that decision. Well, a few weeks ago, they filed a pleading with the U.S. Supreme Court and advised the court that they would be seeking to overturn that ruling. To put this in a nutshell, so you understand if Mumia calls us in a few minutes. If the district attorney wins its petition, its appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and if we lose what I am pursuing, this man will be dead in probably a year. He will be executed. I sent out legal updates periodically for what's happening with Mumia. And in the most recent one, which some of you may have seen, I mentioned that his life hangs in the balance. And that's literally true. So if we hear him in a little bit, bear in mind that he knows, sitting in that cell tonight, that he could be dead in a year at the hands of the executioner. So this situation could not be more serious. And at the end, I will make a few suggestions on what I think we can do. I would like to say now that international pressure is of incredible importance. The fact that Amnesty, Barbara from Amnesty, speaking on behalf of Amnesty, is here tonight is so important, because Amnesty is the organization globally that really speaks up and carries the torch for human rights for people who can't fight for themselves around the world, whether they be victims of torture or the ultimate torture, the death penalty, and many other abuses. And that Amnesty is supporting Mumia because he is a symbol of this fight against the death penalty. It's very meaningful to him and to me, and that's what we need, is international pressure, international support. And we may have a different type of president in the White House in the United States very soon. And if that happens, even though in order to get votes he's said that he's for the death penalty, he will listen to international pressure. He will be sensitive, unlike the Bush administration. And it will dramatically improve the atmosphere in which this case is presently being litigated. Do you have a question? Yeah. Yes. May I just give me a moment? And, these are great questions. I'm not sure I understand that one. Okay. And that one. All right. So I have the questions that some of you have submitted, and I will try to combine these in what I say to him. Let me continue on about where we are with the case. When we presented this case to the United States Court of Appeals of Third Circuit, we were in litigation in that court for really 4 years. This court is just below the U.S. Supreme Court. We argued it a year ago before a panel of 3 judges. And I had other lawyers working with me also arguing. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, based in New York, submitted what we call an amicus curiae, a friend of the court brief. They argued. Also the National Lawyers Guild, which is I guess our U.S. equivalent of RAVE, or RAV, I guess that's what National Lawyers Guild is somewhat equivalent of RAV. I'm just making a point. They also argued and were assisted me in litigation before the U.S. Court of Appeals. In March, the court ruled against us on the big issues that we wanted to win on. Even though the court ruled for us on the death penalty, ordering a new jury trial, one of the issues concerns something that has plagued this case from the day Mumia was arrested on December 9, 1981, and that's racism. You know, if you do not know, Mumia Abu-Jamal is black. One of the issues, that issue is that the prosecution used racism in selecting the jury. In other words, it removed people from being able to sit on the jury strictly because of the color of their skin. The court denied that argument, but it was a 2-to-1 decision, with one judge disagreeing with the other two, and he said they are flat wrong. He said racism was an integral part of what the prosecution did in this case. It's unacceptable under the U.S. Constitution that anybody should go to trial, much less face the death penalty, in which racism was a major factor in putting him or her in that position to be executed or even to be convicted. We are encouraged in what I'm about to file in the U.S. Supreme Court, because that opinion of this judge, who's not a liberal judge, he's a conservative judge, but he championed our cause. And as good as my briefs and my colleagues' briefs have been, he said it better than we did. And he told the other two judges that he said, how can you even consider not granting a new trial to this man when racism was such a major part of this case? That will give us, that's the foundation of what I'm presenting to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's not just me, Robert Bryan, arguing that Mumia should have a new trial. It's, here's a very highly respected federal judge who agrees in the strongest terms possible. So we are very encouraged and very positive about and very hopeful that the Supreme Court will take this case and will grant a new trial. And you need to understand what my goal is in this case. Of course, I want the death penalty off of Mumia. But my long-term objective is I want him free. I want a new jury trial. I would tell you, and I know things that I cannot discuss publicly, and he cannot discuss, but I feel, having tried a lot of murder cases, that if we can get this case back before a jury, that we will win. And I want him to go home to his family. And if we can get that jury trial, that will happen. I feel very strongly about that with what I know. And I think that's what we all want. Mumia's having problems with guards, or he would have already called, but let's just hold on. There's another issue that we will be presenting to the court, and that involves the prosecutor at the 1982 trial actually lied to the jury in his argument. What he told the jury was that if Mumia is convicted, do not worry, because there will be other proceedings after this and appeals, and he implied there'd be a trial, and that this was only part of a long journey through the legal process, the trial. And the courts have held, in some cases, that that's wrong, because, and in this case, what I argued is it turned the whole principle of reasonable doubt upside down. The presumption of innocence, it turned it inside out. Some courts have held that some courts have held, and certainly the U.S. Supreme Court has held, that at least as for the death penalty, that anything a prosecutor does to lessen the feeling of responsibility for the jury is wrong. But the jury needs to understand that it is the final fact finder. It makes the final decision as to whether or not this person lives or dies. And our argument is that should also apply to the guilt phase of the case, where a jury decides whether a person should be found guilty or innocent, not guilty. That the jury needs to feel, as the court tells them at the beginning of the case, that the final judges of this case, of what happens to this person, is you, the 12 men and women on the jury. And what happened in this case is the prosecutor told them, that's not true, which is a fraud. That's a big issue. And Mumia is interested in that issue because it can help other people. It would not just, and this is typical Mumia, it would not just help him in his case, but it would also help other people who are not just people in murder cases, not just in death penalty cases, but it would change the law that now only applies to death penalty cases to all cases. So he's really excited over that, and we'll see what the Supreme Court does with it. As far as timing, the prosecution's brief on the death penalty is due in the Supreme Court on November 19th. My brief on the racism in jury selection and this other issue is due on December 19th. And both sides will be filing responsive briefs. I feel that the briefing will be finished by February. The Supreme Court of the United States moves very quickly. And then the court will decide whether or not it will even hear this case. People need to understand that the Supreme Court only accepts a very small percentage of cases to even hear, to take full briefing, to hear oral argument. We feel, again, that we are in a very strong position, stronger than in most cases, because of this very powerful, eloquent dissent by this judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals. It just gives us such a solid foundation to seek relief in the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, one thing that, you know what I'm going to do? I think Roth wants, and also Bernhauser, why don't I stop? If Mumia calls, assuming he does, I will come back up and interrupt. So why don't we do that at this point, and then I can wind up after he calls.